Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to Literary Arts Live. I'm Jessica Anthony, lecturer in English, and this evening's event is made possible by the John Talia-Bui Fund, which has been established by the family of Professor Emeritus of English John Talia-Bui, a member of the Bates faculty from 1953 to 1989, and author of 6 books of poetry. It was Professor Talia-Bui who inaugurated our creative writing community here at Bates, and this evening's reading from story writer, novelist, and Bates alum, Christina Chiu, is testament to this early vision. Christina Chiu is the winner of the James Alan McPherson Award for her novel Beauty, and is also the author of Troublemaker and Other Saints, published by G.P. Putnam Sons, and winner of the Asian American Literary Award. She was published in Tin House, Washington Square, and elsewhere, and is the recipient of numerous other awards and creative writing fellowships. She received her MFA from Columbia University and now curates and co-hosts the Let's Talk Books author series sponsored by the New York Writers Workshop, as well as the Pen Parentis Literary Salon in New York City. She has also worked, if my research serves me, as a shoemaker slash shoe designer and has found in the craft some corollaries between shoemaking and fiction, which I'm very keen to hear about. Her latest novel, Beauty, is the story of one woman, Amy Wong, a fashion designer coping with challenges of paternal abandonment, conflicts between Chinese and American cultural heritage, and difficult and abusive marriages. As we move through episodes of Wong's life from girlhood into adulthood, Chiu excoriates the narcissism, bias, and inhumanity of the fashion industry by writing her way into it and reporting it in conflict with Amy's identity as a Chinese American woman, mother, and artist. Michael Cunningham has called the novel beautiful in the way of a scalpel blade. It's that sharp and precise, that lacerating and true. Christina, welcome back to Bates.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that.
Well, I think tonight, if it's all right with you, we would love to start with your reading. If you would
Sure.
how much time would you like to read for us about, like, what are you planning on tonight?
I was going to read from I never read from the one of the last chapters, and I thought it might be nice to read a little from that just to get a feeling for one of the things that this this novel really takes a look at is the idea of family and how it evolves sometimes for better or for worse. In this case, I felt it evolved in a way that was necessary for the family. And so the protagonist really has to grow and change. And so I was really happy. You know, sometimes you write, and I'm sure Jessica will be the first to tell you this. Sometimes you write, you have no idea really how it's going to go, and then you're like, oh, thank God, thank God it happened that way. And I think that this last chapter, I can't read all of it because I think I'm not sure if there's enough time, but I will read the beginning of this final chapter called Black Lace and Blue Secrets. Black Lace and Blue Secrets. You like, I say, as my one and only grandchild, Catherine, joins me in the living room to inspect my latest creation, a lace-up 3-inch ankle boot. The quarters are made of a gunmetal sequin fabric, the front vamp a black suede, the laces a thick satin. Oh, Catherine says, holding the right boot. She settles on the red opium bed, which I doubled up with a soft, thick padding, and examines my workmanship. They turned out beautifully, she says. Très couture, don't you think? Deaf, she says. I'd ask for a pair, but I've already got something else in mind. Pray tell, mademoiselle. I return the boot to the boot back to the top shelf with its partner. My apartment is unusual in that my bookshelves are filled with shoes and boots instead of books. And except the first real pair of boots I ever purchased, a thick lace knee-high stiletto, all were crafted since I retired 10 years ago. They include Catherine's first pair of shoes, hot pink Mary Janes, ballet flats, and lace-up riding boots. After a long and frightening Doc Marten stage during her high school years, elegance and beauty finally came back into vogue. Catherine took to placing shoe orders with me, expressing ideas to add her own unique twist to things. Your wish is my command, I tell her. I've got something I need to tell you first, she says, beating me to the punch. The purpose of calling her here is to discuss the company. My son Alex is in his 50s now. He isn't young anymore. It's time she learned the business. Catherine giggles. Whatever she has to say, it must be serious. I haven't heard her giggle since she was a teenager prone to crushes. She pats the seat beside her. Come, Grandma, sit next to me. I get this unsettling feeling that I'm being lowered into a lion's den. Catherine is following in her pop-pop's footsteps. She's a star at Parsons and already noticed in the industry. Her work at school was picked up by Couture Culture. The spring line received rave reviews. The buzz got her into some trendy New York boutiques, and then one of her A-line dresses appeared in Vogue. Is she planning a new line? Does she need capital? Is that her question? I'm not so keen on surprises, I say. Just sit, Grandma, she says. She smiles, teeth clenched with excitement. The red bed is up against the window with a view of the Hudson River. I sit turned toward her. She takes my hands in hers, and that's when I notice a ring. 2-carat, emerald cut, platinum pave frame. But all the disappointments in my life flash in front of me like a massive karmic flipbook. And in one single stroke, my hopes and expectations for Catherine are dashed. How can this be? Is she 21? She is, the same age Jeff was when he first got noticed. Suddenly, the glare from outside hurts my eyes. I'm engaged, she chirps, wiggling her fingers out in front of her. The diamond catches the light and sparks rainbows across the walls and ceiling. I feel as if I got sucker punched. There's an ache in my heart, and yet I'm strangely numb to it. Catherine, however, chatters on. Vanessa invited friends over for her birthday, and when I asked who bought the Tiffany, she said she didn't know. She'd have to open it. So she did, and I was like, wow, what the hell? And before I knew it, she was on her knee proposing, and at first, I had no idea what was even going on. Catherine laughs, and then she says, it's her birthday, and there's nothing she'd love for me more than to be her wife. My darling Catherine, all that potential lost. She could follow in her grandfather's footsteps or mine, and now I see she's choosing mine. Catherine continues on about the wedding, something about a tent affair, and the dress she's going to make, gesticulating with her arms as she describes the bodice. It's going to be strapless with a silk corset on top, sort of like a mini with layers of feathery lingerie chiffon up to the mid-thigh, so lots of leg. And then there's this awesome feathery train, you know? I nod as if I'm listening. On clear sunny days, the Hudson appears liquid silver. Sunlight glints off the river with the help of a new experimental treatment. My ex-husband, Jeff, defied the odds and remained stage 3 of the condition for the next 10 years, finally passing as a result of pneumonia brought on by an upper respiratory infection. He left a quarter of his assets to each of his 3 children, And the last fourth to me. With it, I bought this apartment. You'll design a pair of boots for the wedding, she asks. Hmm? Boots. She extends her long legs. Short, maybe ankle, and lace, definitely lace. Floral or mesh, I ask. Floral, floral. No, mesh. I don't know. 3-inch, I ask. 4? Platform? Yes, she nods. Oh, and black. The dress is black. As long as it's not black and blue, I say. I mean it jokingly, and yet, as soon as the words leave my mouth, I feel the ache expanding in my chest. My life, hers, repeating patterns, karma. Is there a lesson to be learned from this? A way to change this in consciousness? What's wrong, Grandma? She asks, taking my hand. Nothing, nothing. You sure? Because you don't look very happy, and I thought you'd be very happy for me. Of course I am, sweetheart. But even as I say it, a voice inside my head says, there's no fucking way. Who do you think you are? It's just, I say, I sandwich her hand in mine. Isn't marriage a little outdated these days? I mean, the notion itself? Oh, Grandma. Half of them fail, I say. I don't need to mention her parents. Her mother remains bitter and alone, while my son, Alex, has remarried and started a new life with a woman half his age. Catherine frowns at me. I shrug. Just saying. Looks like you've got some interesting beliefs about marriage, she says, crossing her arms and trying to sound as if she were me. I should know, I say. I've done it twice. So no more. Is that right? She says. Exactly. She glances outside, then back at me, and point blank says, so that's what happened with Cameron? Cameron is her boyfriend. Cameron is the man I've just broken things off with. We'd been seeing each other for the past 3 years. We initially met through the master's class, but got to know one another better at a Buddhist meditation retreat. Marriage, the idea of it, must be in the air. I'm 78 years old. I'm too old for that business, I tell her. And I'm too young, right? She says. Actually, yes, you are, I say. She shakes her head. I never thought I'd hear you say you were too old for anything. Well, there's always a first time, I say. She sighs. For what it's worth, I really liked Cameron. I cross my arms. He's a good man. What's that supposed to mean, she says. Are you looking for a hidden agenda here? Because this would be where you back off. As much as I love you. No, Grandma, I'm simply asking what it means. You're the one who tells me all the time to question my beliefs and ask if they're serving me. It would be a shame if one stood in the way of you experiencing the true love of your life. So you have determined he's the true love of my life now, have you? I feel my blood pressure spike. Isn't he? She says. If you really need to know, darling, Cameron doesn't believe in Viagra, I say. Catherine's eyes bulge. TMI, she says, making a T with her hands. You asked, I say. She fidgets with the ring. Do you actually think people stop fucking when they get older, I say? Or is it that you think orgasm is reserved only for the young? I don't know, sort of, I guess. Catherine blushes. She catches my gaze, and all of a sudden we're laughing until tears are flowing from our eyes. It takes a few minutes to gather myself. No, seriously, Catherine. Darling, you're doing so well. What's all the rush? She smiles. There's an earnestness about it that feels kind of deadly. We want to start a family, she says. My heart, everything stops. What is wrong with this younger generation? They have freedom to choose who and what they want to be, what they want to do, where they want to go. Everything my generation of women fought against, they embraced like shit got turned to diamonds. What about your career? I ask. What about it? She says. Your father and I think it's time you join JJ. Why would I do that? She says. I want to have my own line. The two are not mutually exclusive, I say. The company could use your creative talent. I don't know, Grandma. Think about it, Catherine. Your father's not getting any younger. In 5 or 10 years, he'll be handing the reins over to you. I'll stop there.
Mute. Thank you so much. My goodness, I've been like applauding folks because we don't have an audience. So I'm just going to applaud Christina. Thank you for sharing that. That was great.
Thank you.
So yeah, there's so much to talk about with this wild novel. I thought maybe to start, you would give us just a little bit of a sense for the trajectory of Amy's life. I mean, for the folks who are not in the know here, the novel accomplishes a pretty ambitious feat, and that is to cover episodically various periods in Amy Wong's life as she moves from a young girl to an older woman. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about that structure and why that structure was needed to tell the story of Amy.
So originally when I first started writing this book took like about 14 years to write. And part of it is because when I initially started writing I wrote it in a more conventional fashion, today, tomorrow, next month, whatever. And then at a certain point, it just was so frustrating because it was not moving the way I wanted it to move. It was just kind of sluggish, didn't have the energy that I felt it needed. And it was, I wrote the book, it was okay. If I tried to sell it, I probably could have sold it, but it wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't, um, and I couldn't figure out what about it wasn't right. It was like, when something's off and you don't quite have anything to gauge it by, so you're not really clear about why it's off. So I kind of put it in a drawer for many years. And in the meantime, I had a family and everything went kind of berserk. Um, and then finally, when I picked it back up and I was looking through the pages, it was massive, right? Because there was so much ground I wanted to cover. And then I realized, oh, the structure, it's not right. The structure's not right because it should not go from beginning smoothly all the way to the end. All stories, all novels or most novels have a narrative arc, but in this particular case, there is an arc, but what I focused on were the karmic moments in this woman's life, the moments that were inflicted upon her so that she would have the opportunity to change or not. But that door swings open and either she walks through it or she doesn't. And if she doesn't walk through it, she repeats it, which is very karmic and every novelist's kind of dream, right? So once I figured that out, the book went very quickly. I wrote it within about maybe 2 years, and then, which is, I guess, pretty slow compared to other writers, right? But it took me about 2 years to write, and then it took me another 2 years to edit. And then my my agent was not able to sell it. So I decided I would just send it to, I saw that Gish Jen was judging a contest and I love her work. Yeah. So I just sent it. And then I get a call that, oh, you won the contest. And yeah, we're publishing it. So that kind of just happened. So that was great.
Oh, it's so great. Congratulations. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, so I'm wondering if you found any other models in literature for the structure. I mean, did you just, I mean, having this epiphany to restructure, and let's face it, can we say the word rewrite this novel? I think many students who are listening in don't necessarily realize that oftentimes a novel demands many hundreds of pages of revision. And so, yeah, I'm just curious about, like, once you had the instinct to revise the structure, did you find any other novels that accomplished a similar kind of pattern or habit? Or
Well, first, what happened was I had this manuscript and it was like a tome, and you know how like when and I know a lot of you out there are familiar with this. You try to not throw it away because you need to kind of save it, and you know there are parts you can save, but you don't know which parts, so you don't want to throw any of it away. So ultimately, what actually served me the best was to actually throw it away, like physically throw it in the garbage, like
wow.
delete it from my computer. And so that's what I did. And I just, the moments that stood out to me, those were the moments that start to reconstruct. And you'll
Hmm.
be shocked actually, because literally after the book was in production, I had to go through my Dropbox to clear stuff out, and I found an old manuscript. You'd be shocked how much of it, even though you don't have it with you, is the same. Like
Wow.
it was actually shocking to me. Scenes were like the words were different, right? But it was like the same. So so if you ever lose anything on your computer, don't worry, you can redo it and it'll come out pretty much the same. Just trust that it will, and it will.
That certainly makes me feel better. I worry about that constantly. Yeah, so Christina, talk to us a little bit about the subject of this novel. I mean, coming to Amy and deciding to write about the fashion industry. Can you talk a little bit about your impulse, and your interest in this, impulse towards and your interest in this subject, which is really, it's an unusual subject for a
Yeah.
contemporary novel. Yeah.
Well, I decided I wanted to do something challenging. So this is a difference in the first novel, that the first version I was telling you about. She had not gone into the fashion industry. In fact, I think she was a writer, and never do that. Never do that. I can say it doesn't really work very well. So I wanted to choose something really challenging, right? Like choose a topic that seems really superficial
Mhm.
and that people would be quick to dismiss,
Yeah.
but is actually very rich and interesting and smart and, you know, political even.
Yeah.
And we, you know, any outsider has no idea of it. It just kind of looks like very vapid, and people, don't care about anything except how they look or whatever. But it's actually not like that at all.
Mhm.
So I didn't know the first thing about fashion. I mean, I knew how to dress, but that's pretty much it.
You're one up
But
on me. That sounds good.
but I mean, other than that, I just didn't know anything about it. And I thought, you know what? If I want a challenge, that's a challenge. That's a good challenge. I wasn't someone to shop or go into boutiques or, you know, like what is lady, people be like, look at what Lady Gaga's wearing. I'm like, who cares? But
Yeah.
then I started to really care once I started to research and
Mhm.
learn about all these artists. And I mean, they're artists. They're like people who make art for the body,
Mhm.
for you to wear. It pretty much is represents who you are. I mean, it's so interesting. And so, you read stories about, people, men who go fishing and they're like the all American great stories, right? And you know, many women don't know the first thing about fishing and don't care about it. But then when they read it, they accept that it's fishing and wow, look at those metaphors. Look, it's really a beautiful story, right? And so that was the challenge I felt like I was up against.
Mm.
To create a story that in people's minds would be like a woman's story, a woman's idea, but was really just a good fiction story, a story that had beautiful metaphors, had energy, had, was built in a way that was interesting and different, and and be brilliant in its difference. You know what I mean? Like, I think difference is one of those things right now that isn't necessarily a great thing. People kind of shy away from it. They want to be, writing like Hemingway or whatever. But really, it's like difference to me is like a unique opportunity.
Mhm.
And I wanted this book to kind of represent that. And so part of my education really was to take a shoemaking class. So that's actually how I started shoemaking.
And
And
where was this class? I think I read somewhere that it was somewhere interesting. Where did you take it?
I actually took it at the Jewish Community Center in
Yeah.
New York City. And it's like in the basement, right? So it's like you go down there, you're like, what am I getting myself into? Is it like next to the pottery room? What's going on here? And then you get into the hands-on nitty-gritty of actually making a pair and starting from scratch, like
Wow.
buying leather, and you learn all the different kinds of leather, all the different, what a vamp is, what, the different heels to choose from, like how to construct a heel, like like everything. And I was so thrilled about it because whether or not I was any good at it or not, I realized that, oh God, this is such a beautiful metaphor. It's so beautiful. Like if I focus on those details, on the way things are made, that says so much for the story. And I don't need to come outright and say anything. It speaks for itself.
Mhm.
So it was perfect that way.
Do you see any corollary between the representation in fashion, Christina, and the issues of representation of race and gender, and and frankly, just a woman in a marriage? Do you see? I mean, I'm curious if you are thinking of any kind of corollaries between like the beauty of the fashion world and the challenge that Amy faces, essentially asserting herself as a beautiful person in a difficult world that she lives in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that so much of beauty really depends on how you look at it, right? Like we have certain expectations, right? And anything that goes outside of that norm, like is becomes questionable. But then when you're actually building something or creating something, and I think this is true with fiction as well and poetry, but you know, oftentimes if you try to control and make something that cookie, in that box cookie cutter thing,
Yeah.
you just ruin it. You ruin it, right? And so much about life is like that, right? Like, you try to control life. You try to make, in shoemaking, like you go through all the stages, right? All the steps. You can follow it religiously, and it can turn out not the way you thought. It can absolutely, and that's true with fiction, right? Like you're working, you're thinking it's going to end up like this and that or whatever, like the second you try to do that, you kill it, right? You cannot control it, right?
Mhm.
And that is so true to life, to relationships, to so much. And with this character, it isn't until she's able to actually um, enjoy her creativity, like actually allow herself to put that first and foremost in her life.
Mhm.
She's had so many responsibilities, right? She gets married and then she's responsible for this house and this husband or whatever who's like, he doesn't want to deal with stuff, right? So she gets stuck with this stuff, right? And then they have a kid and he's really difficult. So guess who ends up dealing with that? Her, right? So then her whole life ends up being determined by all these external forces.
Mm.
And it isn't until she really starts to actively do create her life, like physically, emotionally, everything, that it starts to turn in a way that's beautiful for her.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, it sure does. I'm thinking back on an early episode with Amy, when she's a younger girl. I believe she's about 16, and she goes to a shoe shop and she meets the boot man. Can you talk to
Oh,
us about the boot man and kind of how, perhaps in your mind, I don't know, maybe I'm reaching here, but how that interaction with this man when she was 16 rather shaped in many ways her destiny in the novel.
yeah. So I should mention that I was an East Asian Studies major, a multi-dis at Bates, and I focused a great deal on religion and in particular Buddhism. So I have always been very fascinated with Buddhism, karma, Eastern religion, and one of the things that I realized with this book was that it became infused with all my ideas of Buddhism and how I think things play out. So this young woman, I mean, she's 16, yeah, she's like a child, really. And she ends up getting herself into this situation, and she doesn't feel like she's in control of it. Kind of like takes control of her. Like she doesn't actively do anything to stop things from happening, and then she ends up having this bizarre, awful exchange with this guy in who a salesman in a shoe shop.
Mhm.
And the karmically speaking, it kind of plays out. There's like an echo, right? Because she like in Buddhism, if you don't understand something and you don't kind of learn the lesson that is in front of you, you're doomed to play it out again. And so there's that echo in her life and this repeating sense of doom.
Mhm.
And so that's what happens until she actually is able to confront herself and ask herself what's happening with her ideas and her beliefs about herself and about her life, really.
Mhm.
And so yeah, so there is that setup.
Could you maybe read just a little bit from that chapter, the
Sure.
opening, maybe the opening of that chapter?
Yeah,
So,
it's so funny because it's a it's the first story that I wrote in this book. I mean, initially it was a short story, and and it's because of this short story that there were actually some colleges, like, they were going to use this as the selection for freshmen at FIT,
mhm.
but then the controversy was this particular chapter.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean, you don't need to read the whole thing for sure, but give us a taste of this. It's powerful stuff, so I
okay,
people might want to hear a little bit.
so it's called Bootman. Black boots, there in the window. Could they really be lace? Wow. Floral and paisley drops. Open-toed, trimmed and with leather, knee-high. They'd go perfect with my strapless. Sexy, yet delicate, a smidgen of the masculine. Dolce de Gabbana? No, judging from the pencil chin heels, Jimmy Choo. Yes. No. Maybe? Heat rises off the pavement. The sidewalk rumbles, steam rising through the grill. Bodies rush up from the subway. I press against the glass at the people as the people brush past. Could they be Chloe? It's hard to say. Everything's in the details and it's already a little too dark to tell. Is Ma gone for good? The Ma left to Hong Kong and left her with her sister. When I was little, we used to go to Chinatown to watch the Chinese double feature. It was always packed, hot, full of cigarette smoke, and with the crackling sound of people snacking on watermelon seeds. One time, Georgie and I got into a fight. Ma shushed us, then passed me over to Dad. His lap was soft and squishy. I leaned against him. It was hot, but in a good way. Go to sleep, Dad said, pressing my head to his chest. But I'm not tired. Dad tried to give me back to Ma. Doesn't she need a nap? He asked. You're welcome to tell her that, she said. You take her. No, you take her. Back and forth I went. Neither wanted me then, neither wants me now. Suddenly, I feel something. Someone's watching. I look past the display. The sales guy, he comes toward me, his gaze like a magnet. His eyes are pale, pale blue, his hair dark, dark brown and spiked at the top. Try them, he mouths, and I get a rush like the boots are already mine. The store has the delicious smell of new leather and shoe polish, also spicy, sweet fragrance. The walls are the kind of lavender you want to wrap around you and sleep inside. At the register, a saleswoman rings up a customer with a shivering chihuahua in her purse. Do you want me to keep going?
I unmuted. Okay, I think we're good. No, that's great. Thank you so much. That was a great sample from a much younger Amy Wong. I'm thinking of a famous short story by Haruki Murakami, Tony Takatani. Yes. You know, I mean, aside from reading Christina Chiu's novel, folks, which you all have to run out and do immediately, I also recommend as a pairing, a literary pairing, the short story by Haruki Murakami called Tony Takatani, who ends up falling in love with a woman who's obsessed with clothes. And I just kept thinking, reading this novel about the parallels between sort of desire and representation in fashion, and how there's something so wanting and trying about the performance of fashion that it's like it's almost making up for some kind of sexual failure in some way. But yeah, sure. I mean, you know, one of the challenges I'll often see, you know, I mean, and this is not only for our students at Bates, but also, I mean, I would say personally for myself as a writer, is to write a sex scene. And, you know, I think obviously there are episodes of sex in this novel that are incredibly difficult to read, difficult to talk about, but they're also, you know, just, you know, sort of more mundane sexual encounters that Amy has. And you know, and they're written very well. And I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about writing sex in fiction. Let's get a little mini craft class on writing sex in fiction.
So my opinion is this. So I think what are the statistics about women who get date raped in college, and you know, women who have sexual issues, you know, with men, and no one ever talks about any of this, right? It never appears anywhere. It's never in fiction. It's never in anywhere. No one ever talks about it, even in nonfiction, even in, you know, if a woman is raped, right? Like no one talks about it. No one says what it is. No one says, and my feeling is that this is partly why it happens. And it's because no one talks about it, and no one makes women realize, like, oh, that's how it can happen. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's one thing when you know that's how it can happen after it happens to you, right? Like, right? But fiction actually can inform people. Like, stories don't always have to be nice. Like, they can actually talk about really dark issues that matter and are relevant. And for me, writing is about writing about what's relevant. And sexuality is very relevant. You know, it's no wonder why, like, if you read, and I really encourage you to do this if you want to write sex scenes. I encourage you to read sex scenes that are written by men. And then I encourage you to read sex scenes that are written by women. And you'll see such a stark difference. And you'll after you read it, you go, oh, no wonder men don't understand. I'm not kidding. Like, sometimes I'll read it and I'm like, oh God, I really hope that's not what he actually thinks. That's just a character, right? But nowhere, like, do people actually talk openly about sexuality and what happens to women. So for me,
certainly not in fiction. It's just not, we don't read, I mean, we don't encounter those explicit scenes that often in fiction.
That's right. And when you do, there's a feeling like, oh, well, that shouldn't be in fiction, right? But who decides that? You know, like, who tells you, who's deciding that for you? Because, like, if you are writing, then you have to decide what's important to you and what matters on the page. And it's not other people who should be deciding this. People will try to tell you what you should be writing, for sure.
If
There
you're
are
in a
plenty
writing
of those
workshop,
people,
you're in trouble. Yeah, that's
right?
right.
But if something matters to you, you need to speak about it. And that's what fiction is. Fiction is talking about what matters. And for me, it's impossible to talk about fashion and beauty without talking about sexuality.
Mhm.
So that's kind of how I ended up writing about it. And believe me, I did a lot of reading. And but the key thing about writing about sexuality or sex is to not try to, like, there's a time to use metaphor and there's a time not to use metaphor.
Mhm.
You never want to use metaphor while you're in a sex scene, because you don't want to make it like, oh, and on the hillside. Like, no, no, you want to stay here in the moment if you can brave it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
If you
right.
can't brave it, don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the key. And you know, did I wonder if I would get attacked for writing about sexuality and sex? Yeah, but does that stop you? I mean,
Love this attitude. Yeah, but so, I mean,
people are going to attack you about all kinds of things,
sure.
so if you just realize that, then there's really nothing to be afraid of.
It's great. Oh, that's great. I love that courage. That endorsement is so excellent. I thought, folks, we could open up the conversation to anyone who has a question for Christina. To ask a question, please feel free to use our chat function, and I will be very happy to read your question out loud to Christina, and we can hopefully get a couple of questions answered before the end of today. So feel free to just jot something down if you're thinking of a question you have. And this can be about her novel. It can also just be about writing stories and becoming a professional writer. Maybe in that vein, we can have just a little chit chat while folks are
Yeah,
thinking about what they want to
I was
ask.
wondering. So you're teaching fiction, right? Have you read and talked about your book with your students and with the Bates community?
Well, I did give a brief reading last February, but by and large, I really try not to teach my own work. I don't want to impinge. I don't want to like force anyone to have to read the misery that is my novel. So
Oh, I doubt that. I just, first of all, I have to say, political satire is so hard to do. Now I'm absolutely dying to read your novel.
oh, thank
I
you.
have like novels like up to here, stacked up like from floor to, it's so ridiculous. But I keep thinking that I'm going to read them all, like right now. But
Yeah.
I
What were
can't wait to read it.
What were you reading when you were writing this novel, Christina? I mean,
Oh,
obviously the novel happened over many years, but were there any books that kind of like really they latched onto you?
well, I read all, so this is the thing. I read fiction, but I read like all kinds of things. I read everything from Buddhism and spirituality to trauma. Uh, what is it? The book about trauma. The body speaks the truth, I can't remember the name of it, but I did a lot of research on trauma, on
Mm-hmm.
narcissism, on what it does to children of narcissists. And I just tried to understand the character as much as possible. And so I just tried to learn everything that was relevant to her, like how trauma plays out, how having a narcissist for a parent plays out, how how having an interest in fashion, what happens to how competitive it is, how difficult it is to break in, like just everything, you
That's
know.
great. We actually have a question that would segue nicely. This is from Elizabeth, who is asking if you might speak a bit more about your representation of mother-daughter relationships in your work and fictional mother-daughter representations in general.
So mother-daughter relationships are actually very interesting to me, in part because when I first started writing, there was a very famous Asian American writer called Amy Chan. And it didn't matter if you wrote jazz, you'd get compared to her.
Yeah, exactly.
If
Yeah.
you're Asian, So, so when, when I was writing my first book, I decided I would, instead of trying to dodge it, I would confront it head on. So one of the stories was about a mother and a daughter and their relationship. But a lot of these stories are really about mother-daughter relationships. In this particular story, the mother disappears, but she comes back for different parts. And I'm just going to tell you guys, but the book I'm working on now, the mother shows up again.
That happens.
Yeah, right. You just can't get them to stop. But it actually, it's funny because I think that, you learn so much about generations from what you know from the mother and daughter relationships, right? Like take Pride and Prejudice, right?
Right.
So, here we have this annoying, like people always talk about how annoying a mother is, and like all she can dwell on is getting her daughters married,
Yeah,
right?
but look what
But
situation she's in.
that's correct. So think about the time, like
Yeah.
for that was like the most loving thing that the mother could have done for her daughters, because otherwise they would be destitute. They would have no home. And
Right.
so right now it's easy to go like, oh, well, I can't stand that mom, right? But at the time she was doing something really important for her daughters because they couldn't own property.
Yeah.
Like this is how far we've come.
Mhm.
Like we, not being able to own property basically screwed women to the point where a mom has to nag like that and make you try to marry that awful little cretin of a guy. Like
Collins, Mr. Collins.
right?
Oh, that's
But
funny.
yeah, so I mean, I think that um the mother-daughter relationship, while it might appear to us like in that particular book that it's not the best, it actually is very close, and it's a lot closer than we can actually comprehend, right?
Mm,
So in
mhm.
my story, the mother seems kind of, she's difficult to swallow, for women who are younger, but really a lot of what mother-daughter relationships reveal is the opportunities and where women are in terms of um, you know their ability to have be their own people,
Mhm, mhm.
so it's like
And acknowledging the cultural moment of your mother and then your own decision for how you are going to either accept or reject her
that
cultural moment that she's brought upon you.
right,
Like it's
exactly, but
Philip
in
Larkin.
in this book too, the mother is a lot like the mother in Pride and Prejudice, in that she's always going on and on about marrying you know, a nice Chinese boy, or a nice boy, right? And that only happens when, even now, when mothers feel that their daughters are not financially sound or independent. And
Mhm.
so that I think says a lot, right? So we can learn so much from fiction, just from relationships and how they work themselves out. In the end, I don't want to talk too much, but in the end, their closeness um, appears more evident, but not in the beginning.
Yeah, yeah. Great. We have a question on revision, if you don't mind, Christina. This is from Rachel, wanting to know a bit more about the revision process for beauty and how you get through as a novelist the inevitable frustrations of the editing. This is actually phrased as the editing phase of writing. So, can you respond to these inevitable frustrations of the editing of writing? How
So
do you?
I think one of the things, and God, Jessica, I would love to hear what you have to say on this too, because for me, I think everyone's different when it comes to the writing and editing. For me, editing is almost half of the writing. Like, the time I spend on my writing is maybe 2 years, and then the editing is another 2 years oftentimes, because
Mhm.
it comes in stages, right? First you do that overall sweep, right? And then you go through it again, and then you can kind of parcel out different different aspects that you need to work on,
Mhm.
and you don't deal with it all at one time necessarily. And I have writing students and who try to, as they're writing, they try to edit. And I think that's one of the most destructive things that you could be doing,
Mhm.
because if you don't even have the whole arc of the book, you don't how do you know if this scene goes here or there, or what? How do you know if someone is really supposed to be having this actual dialogue with someone, or if it should be sharpened in this way or that way? You don't actually know until you have completed the whole book, or almost the whole book, right?
Mhm.
So I think it's important to think about editing in stages. Editing can be a really hard thing to stomach. I mean, honestly, I always have, when I'm about to sit down to do a major edit, I have to take a nap first,
Yeah, sure.
right?
Yeah, I know
No
exactly.
one ever talks about the nap,
The
but
nap is really important. Yeah. Go to sleep first, then deal with it.
right? And then your mind, you clear your mind, you feel
Yep.
more relaxed.
Mhm.
And if you come back to the work more relaxed, it doesn't feel like you're carrying 100 pounds on your back, right?
Yeah.
And going up a mountain. And,
Mhm.
and to approach editing is a little bit like playing a puzzle. And if you can approach it that way, like, oh, I have 1,000 jigsaw puzzles. I'm going to do the border first, right? And
Right.
then and have like a strategy, right? So then you're not like, what? you know, but yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge editing is not easy,
Yeah.
that, the writing might come easier and then there's the editing phase, but it is probably, or oftentimes, more important than the writing,
Yeah.
because that's where I think Michael is so funny when he said, that, I can't remember the blurb, but Michael was really,
Yeah.
he was really into kind of carving things out, right? So you get, it's like a visual artist and a potter, they start with
Big
a
block.
shape, right? A blob and moon shape. And then they start to rework stuff. If it doesn't work out, and then they start again, right? And I think it's all of that, when you start carving it out, and being patient with it, right? Like, really, like, listening and being patient, reading it out to yourself, and constantly working it in a loving way, in a loving way, because remember, it's so hard to remember this, but writing and editing too, because it's part of the writing, it's something you love.
Yeah.
I know it's so hard to remember that because it feels laborious and awful, but it's something you love,
Mhm.
and not everyone gets to do it,
Mhm.
and you get to do it.
That's so great. I want to bring you into my classroom tomorrow, Christy. I wish I could just bring you into my classroom. Say, I just love it. That's the answer. If you're not having fun, neither is your reader, I promise you. Um, let's see. I think we have time for one more question. We've got a question from Jeremy, who is going back to this question of a little bit about female relationships. He says, Christina, thanks for coming. And going along with the question of mother-daughter relationships, how does this affect grandmother granddaughter relationships? From a lot of readings from Asian culture, I have seen grandparents bonding well and spoiling their grandkids, which is a stark contrast with their relationship with their children. Interesting question.
Well, I think that part is not common, is not just Asians. I think the grandparent thing with children it's universal,
Yeah.
and part of it is because grandparents don't have the responsibility. Like, they literally get to play and then say, here you go, time to go home, right? Or at worst, they stay for the weekend and help out during the weekend or whatever. But I have a friend, she's not Asian, and she just had a grandson. Oh, the way she dotes on him.
Yeah.
It's just, she's like in love. She's in love. And I think that you are able to be in love in a way with your grandchildren that you aren't with your children. While you love them, the the sheer responsibility of having a you have a human being. You
Yeah.
hold, like, you have this new human being. What are you going to do with it? You know what I mean? But when you're a grandparent, you've already been through it. You're not fully responsible, right? Because the parents are there, so you
Well,
get to actually.
there's such an interesting corollary between Amy's career and like the arrival of her grandchild. Like, I mean, things really change for her, and there's something quite positivist and quite unlike everything that we've read of her life right up until the end of the novel. And so there's I don't know if that was intentionally done or not, but that certainly makes sense,
I
Christina.
think that I think there's one thing about young people, and I think that and when I say that, I hope no one feels like I'm being condescending. I'm in my 50s, so when I mean young people, I mean like people in their 20s,
Yes.
or 30s, right? Um, like, if you're old and you're hanging out with old people, like, they always talk about the same stuff, and there's like not very interesting after a while. But when you're around young people, they're always keeping you awake and alive, and like, you're learning new things, and you're like, I have a 17-year-old, and he was showing me TikTok things about about
I just love how you said that, this TikTok thing, this crazy TikTok. I don't know
no,
what these kids are doing.
meanwhile, he's all about it, right? But he's showing me these funny TikTok videos,
Videos. Yeah.
and I'm sort of like, wait, why is that funny?
Yeah.
And he's like, Mom. And and but then when I get it, I'm like, oh my God, kids are so creative,
Yeah.
you know? And that's how you stay young. Like, you need young people in order to kind of stay awake and passionate and alive, and know what's
Yeah.
going on.
Well, and for all of the trauma and the tragedy of the novel, I mean, it certainly does have an outcome that leans towards the optimistic. I mean, at least it does in my mind.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I do think that, I think that's one of the things that I wanted to show, that things can be really difficult. You can go through trauma, but you can also make choices to come out the other side and take control of your life, like take control of that narrative, right?
Mhm.
Because if you treat life like it controls you, then you never really have a good outcome,
Mhm.
because you're always waiting for outside things to determine what happens to you. But if you, like in this case, the character actually like, there's a moment where she actually wakes
Yeah.
up. She's like, oh wow, I have been thinking like this whole time. And it transforms what she's able to do, because she's able, it's like, um Toni Morrison talked about the gilded cage, right? Right. The birds are in a cage, right? Like, if you think about it, we're in cages. We're in cages that are barred with our beliefs about what we can't do. Because look at Oprah. She was, what, pregnant at 13 or something. She, she's raped by her mother's boyfriend or some weird thing like that. But look what she did. Like, if she had believed that she couldn't go anywhere, and she wouldn't have gone anywhere.
Mm. Yeah, Amy Wong awakens to her own unreliability in a really compelling way, folks. I urge you to go seek out this novel, Beauty. It was published, I believe, in May. Is that right? Did it come out in May? So it's been
Yep.
out for
The height of the COVID epidemic.
yeah, yet another victim of the COVID novel. I'm with you. Christina, thank you for making us a part of your book tour this evening. Thank you for coming back to Bates, and we wish you every fortune with this book, and we hope you keep in touch.
Thank you. And I look forward to speaking to you too soon. Bye, everyone. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.